Welcome to the April 19th, 2021 Troy City Council special meeting for our budget study session this evening. We'll call the meeting to order and ask for the roll call. Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker.
Here.
Councilmember Abraham.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Here.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga.
Here.
Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick.
Here.
All present this evening. First up on the agenda is public comment. So again, while we're meeting virtually, and we're back to virtual, as you can see, you can submit your public comment via voicemail to 248-524-3302 or by submitting an email to publiccomment@troymi.gov. City Clerk Dixon, do we have any public comment submitted for tonight's meeting?
No, we don't, Mayor.
That makes this section very quick. Very good. As always, please, regarding our budget, if you didn't make public comment for this evening, we're happy to hear from you anytime through any of our social media, email, or our phone numbers are all on the website. But your voice matters, so we appreciate that. Next up is the business stated in the special meeting notice. We have one agenda item this evening. D1 is a presentation of the proposed fiscal year 2021 to 2022 budget, which is available at troymi.gov/budget. There's a few different links on there, but I did see it on there to the left at the bottom. It's the proposed fiscal year 21 to 22 budget. So with that in mind, my understanding is we'll have a presentation from city management to start things out. I'm going to ask if possible for council to hold questions until after the presentation, because I found after a few of these that quite often the question we may ask 15 minutes in is about to get answered 20 minutes in. So I think it's probably most efficient to hold everything until the end. We'll ask some questions, have some discussion as necessary, and see where things end up this evening. We also did submit some questions in advance, which I noticed are online as part of the agenda, late submittals on the website as well. So there's some good questions and answers provided there. So with that, I will hand it over to City Manager Miller to start things off this evening, and we will get the process going.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. IT, if you could share the screen with the presentation, that would be helpful. And while that's happening, I want to take the opportunity to thank the many staff that work on this budget. Many people do at the department level. That information then is put into New World Systems and it gets sent to Rob and his team, and they package it in the final form. But also there are a lot of people who help design it and organize it and make it look pretty. And specifically that's Beth Tashik in our office, Stephanie Flesher, and then Rob coordinates all that. So I appreciate everyone's work on this. It takes many people to get the budget completed. I'm going to start off the presentation, so let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So the budget highlights is that this is our millage rates are stable. It's going to increase by 0.0163 mils or 0.2% from last year. The water and sewer rates are stable and increase about 2.7%. While the capital fund has had a fairly large increase of proposed expenditures. It's up 45.8%. That's like 16.8 million to 24.5 million. I think that's really representative as I-75 gets completed in the construction. We can really start focusing on our and the county roads coming up in this construction season. And then the library fund is new. We'll have the new millage in place, and we are working on restoring 7-day service, which should occur approximately on July 1st. And we are going to dedicate in this budget approximately $1 million in maintenance and upgrades for the library. Next slide, please. What's also interesting is as we were preparing the budget, we had the survey happening. And then we got the survey results just before we were about to present this. And we were able to pull a few things out from the survey that helps highlight this budget. And one of the things that people seem to not like are the conditions of our roads. And that's understandable because we spent 2 construction seasons going without really doing any work on them. So therefore, 50% of our residents agree that street maintenance is a top priority, and we have budgeted $11.8 million in the major and local street projects. The survey also states that people want walking trails and pathways and bike trails, and more than 50% of our residents agree that walking and bike trails are a top priority, and we've included $1.9 million for park development, which include trails and pathways. Next slide, please. Also, there are a couple other things I would like to highlight, and that is community engagement and diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have awarded a contract to GovHR USA, and they're working on putting together a report. They had conducted interviews with most of us that are on this call. That report, which will include recommendations, include the next steps, budget estimates, is expected very soon. And we may need to amend this budget to implement some of those recommendations. So therefore, we're going to have additional meetings while the budget is active and amended. Also, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 is about ready to become, it was effective March 11th, and in 60 days, we should be receiving some funds. However, Troy, just like every other local community throughout the nation, is awaiting guidance from the U.S. Treasury Department, exactly how we can spend it, and also the reporting and reporting requirements, because that we'll have to carry that through. We will provide updates and help facilitate decision-making process as soon as possible, but not before we have to approve this budget on or before the third Monday in May. Next slide, please. Today, our agenda includes a review of all funds and a general fund summary, which includes public safety, general government, public works, community development, recreation, and culture. We also have the special revenue funds, which all include the library, major and local roads, refuse, and recycling. We also have enterprise fund summary, which include water and sewer, golf, which is 2 golf courses, and our outdoor aquatic center. The capital projects fund summary include equipment, major and local roads, and then building and land improvements. There is also internal service fund summary, which include the fleet, facilities and grounds, and information technology. We also will summarize our debt service. And this is kind of an important year because we have 3 bond series which are paid off. And we actually will have 0 mills dedicated to debt. And then we'll have questions and answers. The one thing I would like to just talk a little bit about right here is over the past few years in which I have been the city manager, we have kind of worked on trying to allow city council to deliberate a little more effectively and earlier. And we are starting to do that in November, December. And then that feeds into the recommended budget. And I think what we're seeing is less of a need for meetings in April because we spend more time in November, December. And so at the end of this meeting, I'm going to ask City Council whether they feel it's necessary to have the special meeting that's scheduled this Thursday. We will not need to present any additional information, but we can talk about that a little bit later. Next slide, please. Next slide. So our revenue for all funds have increased about 1% to $145.7 million. About almost 38% of that comes from taxes, while almost 36% comes from charge for services. And then the rest is a little bit of smattering of license and permits, grants, state shared revenue, local contribution, charge for services, not charge for services, I mentioned that, but fines and forfeitures, interest and rents, and others. Next slide, please. While the expenditures for all funds has decreased 4.9% to $167.6 million. About 35% of that is the general fund, while 26% is the enterprise funds, while 15% special revenue and 14% for capital projects, and then 10% for internal service funds. And next slide, please. So I'm going to turn this over to Rob Melzak, our Chief Financial Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for allowing us to speak to you tonight. Dave, next slide, please. So you can see here, this is the general fund revenue. That's where we'll start. And as in similar years, our taxes are our biggest item at about 62%. The other two big items, state shared revenue at about 14% and charges for services at 12.6. I wanted to point out, though, that charges for services remain down about $1 million because of COVID, and that's all in the community center. So this budget, when I worked with Brian Gould on getting the revenues together, we wanted to make sure that we didn't overstate reality, and we don't even know for certain if we will make the revenue numbers. As you remember, you guys, this board passed a resolution, a budget amendment to lower our revenues in the 2021 fiscal year and replace that with some CARES Act revenue. Next slide, please. So the tax revenues are up to $36.3 million, or 2.5% increase. Not bad, as Mark had mentioned earlier. Our mills are a little bit higher than last year. And if you think about that, this year we don't have a debt millage. We now have a library millage that's increased to 1.1 before rollbacks. And then there's also the Headley rollbacks. Next slide, please. So this slide talks about what average Troy tax bill looks like for average resident. And as you can see, when you look at the bottom there, City of Troy, we have that amount there is about 27% of the overall tax bill. And again, we truly believe that we give a great value for the amount that each resident homeowner is charged for their portion of that. Next slide, Dave. So when you look at this is what our millage rate's going to be this year in the yellow column there. We kept general operating at 6.5 again. The capital took the hit for the Headley amendment between those two combined. Our refuse remains at 1.09, way below the 3 that's allowed by state law before Headley. And so we have a lot of room there. But again, we're very efficient, so we only have to charge 1.09. And then the library. If you guys remember, when you were deliberating, we were deliberating what should it be. And I think there was some talk about the concern about Headley, right? And when you look at that, our 1.1 mils is already down 0.5%, and it's down to 1.0942. Next slide, Dave. So when you compare us to others, you can see that, again, we were one of the lowest in the area, if not the lowest in the area. And I just wanted to highlight, from my perspective, why I think it is able to remain so low too is if you think about how we deliver our fire and EMS services, that model really is beneficial to the residents. And then secondly, our legacy costs and how we've handled those through the years as well. So when we start the budget each year, we're not in the hole with many, many legacy costs. I think those two things really drive those numbers. Next slide, Dave. When we met a year ago, this slide really concerned me. If you think about state shared revenue and the sharing of our sales tax, when you look at this, if you look at the last 4 columns, we're doing okay, and we're sticking tight. It's the economy hasn't been impacted as much from this perspective as many had predicted. I can't tell you how many webinars I was on when there was some major concern by economists that this was going to be down 30%, and it's not, thank goodness. So very excited about that. Next slide. Okay, general fund expenditures. When you look at this, you say, hey, where are we spending our dollars? And like most organizations, our public safety is 60%. I wanted to point out a lot of organizations get up close to 2/3, but that's because if you look at our recreation and culture, a lot of cities will have a recreation millage where they'll carve that out of the general fund. So therefore, I think we're right in line with a lot of communities, and I think we're really proud that we keep our overhead costs down. And this is good news for the residents. Next slide, please. So I do want to talk about for a second some of the highlights of the general fund. And first off, you'll see that our expenditures are down 67 million down to 62, and it's down 7.5%. If you took a sneak peek at the budget earlier this weekend, you'll know that we had a major reorganization of the general fund. And that's because what we've done is we've taken our Michigan transportation funds, which are also known as Act 51, and they used to be recorded in the general fund, or they currently are right now, and we're going to move those out, and we're going to have them recorded in the special revenue funds for the major and local streets. And basically how we handled it in the past was we used the general fund as a pass-through. We would record the expenses in the general fund, and then we would get money in from the special revenue funds to offset that. Well, I just want to let you know that the state of Michigan has asked us to change this accounting. And this is how I used to do it at my previous employer. So I'm used to this, and this is what it's intended to be. So we're so to speak, modernizing our general fund to make it more in line with what the state wants. And are also in talking to our auditors, they prefer it as well too. You'll see this in many of the explanations coming up. So it'll get mundane this one year, and then we'll move on from there. Next slide. So public safety, not impacted by Act 51. Our expenditures are 3.1% higher than the prior year, up to $38.2 million. In police and fire, there's not really much to say about it. It's just a normal year with normal contract increases. Both police and fire are under contract. And so most of their capital will be in the capital, or all their capital will be in the capital fund. So that's why these expenditures are in line with our expectations. Next slide. General government, very flat. And you can see that it includes the city managers, the clerk, attorney, human resources, and financial services. But where it is that why we're so flat is we don't have as many expenditures, about $200,000 less, or $140,000, excuse me, less because of the presidential election that was in the 2021 fiscal year that now in 2022 we won't have. And this is a normal cycle every 4 years. Next slide. So this is the area that got impacted most by Act 51. And this is just moving Act 51 expenditures to special revenue. Bob will have a great slide coming up that shows that we've had basically normal inflationary increases over the last several years for Act 51 dollars. The 2.1 that remains, that's basically our drains, our street lighting, and a couple other smaller items. Next slide. Community development, again, flat. And that's because last year in the 2021 budget, we increased engineering contractual for all the work that's coming. And we plan to use all of it this year, I can tell you that. And then much of it will be offset when we charge those expenses into the capital fund. So good news here as well. Next slide. Recreation and culture, down a little bit, 8.86%. And again, believe it or not, Act 51 does pay for tree maintenance. That was always in the general fund, and that's going to be moved out to the special revenue funds. And then our community center is going to be lower again this year. We eliminated one position there, and also less supplies and less other expenses because of COVID-19 at this point. Next slide. This is we'd like to show this to you every year. This is a recap of the recreation department in total. Our revenues at 3.0 million are down about $1 million still, and our expenditures overall at 4.7 million. So when we shared this slide with you last year, that the 65% number was at about 80%. So what's happened is because we're having less revenue in, we have to rely more on the general fund unrestricted to help cover this recreation department, call it shortfall. Next slide, please. All right, so parks expenditures decreased by 19.9%. Like I mentioned earlier, it's because of Act 51 again. And overall key components of this budget include park maintenance, over $1 million, and then some local tree maintenance and planning, and also athletic field maintenance. Next slide. In transfers, we were able still to maintain taking from the general fund and moving it over to the capital projects fund, $1 million. And this goes for a variety of items like the community center, roof replacement, park improvements, fire trucks, and more. So I wanted to also mention one other item that, Councilmember Chamberlain Kranga had mentioned. She had asked a question about our fund balance percentage. And I wanted to let you know that because of the CARES Act dollars that we've gotten in, we will be over 30% at the end of this 2021 fiscal year. And then what we're proposing is a budget that is $4 million using fund balance and a little bit more than last year. And again, it's because our recreation revenue is down. So we will not spend all that $4 million, but we will end up on the high end again of our threshold of where we want to be for general fund unassigned fund balance. We'll be on the upper end of that 20 to 30% threshold. And that's it for the general fund. And I'll pass it over to Bob now.
Thanks, Rob. Tonight I'm going to talk about special revenue funds, which this is where the excitement is this year. This and the capital budget, I think. Next slide, please. So we've talked about the major roads and local roads and the accounting change there. So the revenues that come in are basically flat. And again, this is an accounting change. The money is still coming in from the state and it's still being spent on the same things. It's just being recorded differently than it was before. Next slide. So this is a chart that we created to kind of help show what we've spent in the past and what is being proposed and budgeted in the future. When you have an accounting change like this, you look in the budget and you see a bunch of general fund line items that used to have expenditures in them in years past. And then this coming year and the years going forward, they're zeroed out. And then you have other lines in the special revenue funds that used to be zero, and now they have expenditures in them. So it's kind of hard to match up expenditures from before and after the change. And this is what this table attempts to do. So you can see that overall, this includes both major and local streets together. Our spending has been around $5 million in the last few years. And the amended budget this year is up over 6, and then the proposed budget next year is up over 6. And we could very well end up coming under budget in these, oftentimes because winter maintenance is included in the major and local street funds. So if we don't have a lot of snow and ice, then we won't expend as much on winter maintenance. Next slide, please. Rob mentioned our refuse rates are basically flat. The millage rate remains the same at 1.9 mils. Because of the increase in values, revenues from that millage will increase by about 1.5%, and expenditures will increase by about 2.8%. And so these are no major changes planned here, just kind of normal inflationary increases. And the bottom line to the average resident is that their cost, the average cost is $68.52 for the year. Next slide. Now this is where it gets exciting. The library fund revenues are increasing by more than 60% from 3.7 million to 6 million. And that's because voters replaced the old millage, which had been rolled back to 0.6805 with a new millage. And you recall that in November, the voters approved that 1.1 mils, which has already been rolled back, like Rob said, before we even get to levy it for the first time. I think that happened once before with one of the 0.7 millages in the past. So expenditures are going to increase along with that new revenue, and the library is going to add 6 new full-time positions to provide more and better services and nearly $1 million in maintenance and upgrades in the building. Next slide. So talk a little bit more about that. We've been talking about restoring 7-day service for I don't know how long, probably since 2010, which was the last time Troy Public Library had 7-day service. And what that means in terms of hours is increasing from 55 hours a week to 62 hours a week. And you can see here Monday through Friday, 10 to 9, Friday and Saturday, 10 to 5, and then some days, 1 to 5. Next slide. Building maintenance is also very important to the library. Probably not very exciting to the average library patron here. We're going to do some exterior work on the building, repair elevators, replace some windows in the original wing, which is now the youth area. And there's also $40,000 worth of HVAC work to be done next year. Next slide, please. Now, upgrades. This is something that was a real focal point when we talked about the library millage last year. We have phase 1 of the youth area renovation that will be budgeted for and executed in this coming year, a renovation of the administration area. And then there will be a planning for the adult area renovation, including a makerspace. So that'll just be the plan as to how that adult area will be renovated in the future. But we're also going to add study rooms to the adult area. And curbside service has been so popular, that's going to continue even after the library reopens to the public. And so we're going to make some improvements to the library in order to keep that curbside service going. Next slide. So there's some enhancements to existing services at the library. There's going to be more marketing, more teen and youth services. And we're introducing new services, which includes creating 2 new departments within the library. The community engagement department is going to do outreach to the community, but that's also going to include home delivery of books. And the digital services department, obviously digital services have really been a big focal point to the library in the last year. And e-materials, technology-based services, including the makerspace, are all going to be housed in a new digital services department. Next slide. Enterprise funds, next slide, please. Water and sewer, it's one of these things that we take for granted until it doesn't work, but we're going to keep things working with a modest increase of 2.7% this year. So that's going to increase the average residential bill from about $275 to $282. Still one of the very lowest rates in our area, very affordable compared to other communities. And that assumes our specific sales volume of 470,000 units. And the actual cost could vary if there's a huge increase or decrease in water usage, because a lot of the costs of the system are actually fixed cost of infrastructure, not the cost of the water itself. Next slide, please. Capital projects in the water and sewer area are decreasing substantially this year. It's not because we're not investing in water and sewer infrastructure. It's because we made big investments in water and sewer last year. This year, we're tapering that down a little bit, and you're going to see bigger investments in roads this year. Next slide, please. Sylvan Glen Golf Course. It's just kind of steady as she goes. Revenues projected to increase about 2.6% and expenditures about 1%. Next slide. Sanctuary Lake, also modest 2.1% revenue increase, 2.6% expenditure increase, and its debt to the general fund will increase by about $800,000 this year. And this is because of the debt service payment that the operating income from the golf course can't actually cover. We've talked about this before. Eventually that debt will be paid back, assuming that the Sanctuary Lake Golf Course remains cash flow positive. Next slide, please. So Aquatic Center, big budgetary changes this year because the Aquatic Center did not open in calendar year 2020. And with the Aquatic Center, it can be a little confusing because the Aquatic Center season between Memorial Day and Labor Day actually spans 2 different fiscal years. But suffice it to say, revenues are budgeted to increase by just 1.7%, and expenditures are going to decrease by 28%. And that's due to less capital being invested this year. We did several capital projects in the current fiscal year, which we've talked about in the past. And like the golf course, the Aquatic Center also has a much smaller debt to the general fund. It's currently about $200,000. Next slide, please. Now I'll turn it back to Rob to talk about the capital fund.
Thanks, Bob. Next slide, please. So as you as we talked about before, the city has more needs than dollars to spend. Matter of fact, I know Councilmember Hamilton had asked a question earlier about, he noticed in year 2 of our budget that we actually go negative in the capital projects fund. And basically what that is yes, there's just more capital requests than revenue coming in. Will we have that go negative next in the second year of the budget? Of course not. We will just reprioritize expenditures and lower them, or look for a different funding source. So those are our 2 really opportunities that we have there. So things needed to be prioritized this year, and we prioritized roads. As it was mentioned earlier, roads got put off the last few years during I-75 construction. Our building assessment, we're putting money into our city buildings this year. Last year, we didn't spend any money on fire apparatus, and we have a couple major pieces of apparatus that we'll talk about soon. Current funding includes a little bit of a decrease, and that's because of Headley, and the millage is down from 7.2 to 7 million. We have a transfer increase of 4.7% from 8.5 to 8.9, and we'll talk about those components as well. But the big news is we're up to $24.5 million. The increase here shows 22.8%, and why that's different than what Mark had shared earlier was because this 19.9 also includes items that weren't spent in the prior year and re-encumbered. The amount of 45% that Mark had mentioned earlier was pure what was asked for last year versus what's asked this year. Next slide. So this is the breakdown of the revenue, like I had mentioned. And again, there's 2 big components, and it's taxes and transfers in. The transfers in are from the major road funds at 3.5 million, local streets at 2.0, library at 1.4, general fund at 1, and drug forfeiture at 0.8. And that 0.8 is going to be primarily for body cameras for the police. Next slide, please. So this is project fund expenditures, and this is broken down. There's 3 main components on the left-hand side. The 34% and the 14% are the road funds. And then the 24% on the right in the red is building improvements. And we'll break those down further here. Next slide. Okay, so major streets, 8.3 million, local streets, 3.5. Within the major streets, I just wanted to mention Bill Hooter. He's done a great job in getting revenue from the federal government via grants of about 1.7 million to mitigate some of this cost to Troy residents. So he's done a great job in doing that. You'll see Rochester from Barclay to Trinway, $2.2 million, Square Lake from Adams to Coolidge. And then we continue to go after one of our weaknesses, and that's in the industrial road maintenance, and we continue to fund that. Next slide, please. City buildings, like we talked about, we have that assessment report. We're spending 2.9 million on roof and HVAC over at the community center to keep that building running the way it should be. Want to note that on the police, it's just HVAC and not roof. That was my mistake, and I'll correct that in the final budget. The court HVAC as well for $415,000. Historic Village has $325,000 for some cleanup and exterior repair. Next slide, please. So we had talked about how this surveyed very well in the parks, the trails and pathways. This is year 2 of year 5, putting $750,000 towards it. So this is in our 5-year plan. We also have the Civic Center Skate Park for $555,000 and Sylvan Glen Lake Park, $250,000. The fire department has a ladder truck at $890,000 and an air tender truck at $400,000. And then they also have a couple other $100,000 for some repairs within the stations. Next slide, please. Our library, Bob really covered this in quite a lot of detail, but books and materials, $600,000, and the youth renovation at $400 are the 2 main items of the total 1.4 going into the capital projects fund. Police, we talked about this a lot in November when we had the budget meetings. The body worn cameras we have at $404,000. I should point out that that's not the cost of them in total. We're still working with police, and police is still working with the vendors to talk about if this gets passed by council. It's going to be over $2 million probably, and we're going to be using drug forfeiture of at least $800,000. We're still working up those numbers and trying to finalize those. But ideally, we want to utilize our drug forfeiture fund as much as we can. And also, the county is replacing the radio system, so that's good. That happens every decade or so, and it's this time now that we have to replace this. And this is also a good investment. Next slide, please. I'll pass it over to Mark now as we talk about internal service funds.
Thank you, Rob. Internal service funds are relatively unique. The way that you can look at it is when departments or divisions of the city need to purchase different types of services and goods to operate day to day. Next page. First one is a fleet. So this includes mowers and things of that nature, but also trucks and cars. Well, we expect the revenues to increase 3.4% to $5.2 million. And yes, each department is charged a certain rate for certain types of vehicles, and then that covers maintenance and gasoline, etc. The operating expenditures will increase 1.1% to $3.83 million. Next page. Building operations. So the revenues are going to increase 2.4% to $1.51 million. And yes, each department is charged a square foot price, which includes cleaning of the facilities and everything related to operating day to day like that. The expenditures will increase 13.2% to a total of $1.56 million. Next slide, please. And the last internal service fund is information technology, and the revenues are going to increase 3.2% to $2.3 million, and those revenues are generated at charges to each department based on like a per computer fee charge. So if you have, let's just say 10 computers, you multiply the individual computer charge, and that's where these revenues come from. Operating expenditures increase 0.8% to $2.12 million. Next slide. Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Rob.
Thank you. And if you guys haven't gotten excited about it, this is where the presentation goes off the rails with excitement. So here we go. Next slide. The debt millage is 0. Can't ask for anything better than that, right? Proposal A, which was streets, Proposal B, public safety, and Proposal C, recreation, will be paid off in this fiscal 2021 year, as Mark had actually mentioned earlier. We did a good job with the DDA debt. That was refinanced in fiscal 2021, and the name of it will be New Series 2020 because it actually happened in calendar year 2020. And there, if you recall, we used funds that we got back from the parking structure, and we paid down the debt by a little bit over $3 million. So that helped greatly, as you'll see that the amount of debt requirements going forward is much less. So now the new Series 2013 and 2020 DDA debt, because we still haven't officially paid off all of the 2013 debt, there's one more year left of it, is financed by transfers from the DDA. So the total debt outstanding is going to be $10.5 million as of June 30th, 2021. And it'll still be scheduled. It's going to be paid off in 2034. We didn't mess with the duration of the debt. Our debt service requirement budgeted for 2022 fiscal is going to be $596,000. So again, I know the mayor's on this board, but on Wednesday, when we go over that budget, we'll be talking about how our revenues were impacted a little bit, but we still have a lot of clearance on our revenue over our debt service. So great news there for the whole debt service fund. Next slide, please, Dave. All right, and then even even better news. The volunteer fire, we're at about, I have the exact number. We are at 44.2% funding level after the changes that this council made to the plan last year. Our required contribution is $1.8 million, and our outstanding liability is $14.2 million. So we do have some work there on the volunteer firefighter plan to get that up. Now the retiree healthcare is in great shape. We're at 82.7% as of June 30th, 2020. And again, our contribution this year is going to be $3.2 million, and our liability is 19.9. As I can tell you that those funds are with UBS, our investment consultant, and the funds have done great. And I was looking at the numbers through March 31st, and we are over 90% funded now. So I can't wait to see what our next actuarial evaluation gives us, because we do an actuarial evaluation every 2 years on this fund. And I believe that it's going to go a lot lower than the 3.2 million we currently are giving. So again, if and when that happens, we'll have additional money in future budgets to spend on other items. And lastly, the pension, great news, funded at 122.4%. We don't have a contribution for that fund, and we have no liability. Matter of fact, through the audit, June 30th, 2020, we had $36 million surplus. And again, that fund has done very well under the direction of Councilmember Hamilton and the rest of the board. So I wanted to conclude that with Public Act 202, we are required to have at least 60% funding in our pension and 40% funding in our retiree healthcare. And we have both of those over doubled. So again, this helps tremendously, so we can spend items on things like roads and infrastructure and people. And so this is great news. I'm going to pass that on over to Mark now.
Thanks, Rob. So what you see here is projected as an infographic prepared by Stephanie Flesher in her office, and we think she's done a great job. And I'm sorry, Rob, for taking boring information and making it look good. So I apologize if I'm repeating myself a little bit, but our budget and our budget process has evolved over some time, where it used to be that 2 days were necessary to present all the information in April with council. However, by us creating a process where we engage with council in November or maybe December coming up, we're able to get what council's desires are and try to build that into the city manager's proposed budget. And I think we've done a good job with that. Now, as an example, though, community engagement and diversity, equity, inclusion, we don't know exactly what we're going to do, but we have set up a process to move there, and we'll be able to hold some special meetings of council to help deliberate and then see what type of budget amendments we would like to do. So I'm about ready to end here. I just want to say that from management standpoint, we don't really need to present any more information per se. And we look back at the record, and last year we did cancel the second special meeting, and we did, though, have some discussion at a regular meeting about the budget, which is a possibility. And so management's open to hearing what council wants, one, with questions and answers, and also whether the meeting on Thursday is necessary. And just remember that we expect to have a robust, for the lack of better terminology, strategic planning process in the fall to help guide next year's budget process, which will start up in January of 2022. With that, Mayor, I'm going to turn this over for questions and answers. And I know the mayor and I talked a little bit about breaks. We haven't really built anything into this, but at council's leisure, we'll take a break and answer any questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mark and Bob and Rob and all department heads and Stephanie for the graphic work. I mean, and really everybody, I know it's a team effort, and it's not an effort that's just started today. It's been going on for a year. So we appreciate very much all the work that everyone's done, and a lot of moving parts, obviously, and all of that. And I think we don't take it for granted, but we get a nice binder or electronic version with everything kind of all put together for us to review, and it makes it a lot easier for us from that perspective. So thank you for all that hard work, and thank you for a good, solid presentation as well. That it touched on a lot of the important things, and really appreciate it. I'll start with questions from anybody. I've been thinking about best way to do this. I don't remember how we handled it last year, but let's just start with some general questions. And if we need to have any discussion items on anything specific as that moves along, we'll handle it. But we'll start with questions from council. Guess there are none. We'll move on. That's a good sign. That's Councilmember Chamberlain Kranga. I'm sorry, we switched to Zoom also, so it's a different look for me. I have to get everybody it's a little different, believe it or not. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll just kick it off. And if other things pop up, hopefully I can jump in at some point. So the questions that I sent in advance were kind of my questions around just diving into the budget, kind of mechanics and making sure I understand. The questions I want to focus on today are about kind of the big ticket items that I think are on people's minds. So the element around body cams, and I am really supportive of all that our police do, and being able to rise to the occasion as we see more and more communities call for this sort of level of transparency. And as I understand it, a lot of this has come from within the police department. They have actually taken an interest and have been doing this over the past year, really surfacing options and ideas. So some questions I have around the body cams is, I know I asked a question around to what extent does the drug forfeiture resources with that, and you explain that now, how you expect some of that to cover it. Other questions are around, is this a one-time charge? Are there ongoing charges for this sort of sometimes technology? You have to pay like an ongoing fee. So wondering about that. Also, how long does the technology last? Are these body cams that can last for 10, 20 years? What is their kind of shelf life in a sense? And what are the range of options out there in terms of what it looks like we've landed on? Is it the Cadillac? Is it something in the middle? Where does it fall in terms of the different sort of body cams? Because I know the police department was testing a lot of different options out there. And then in terms of an expense to store the data. So the value of this is only valuable insofar as we can store the data. And a lot of times there are fees to be able to actually store all that information. So wondering, is that an additional fee, and what does that look like going forward? I have other questions, but I'll just stop there on the body cams.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. So is that a Mark, Bob, Rob, or Frank answer?
Well, I will start out and turn the floor over to Chief Nastasi, but I'm not sure if we can answer all the questions right here, but I would like to give the chief an opportunity to address it. We may have to come back with some written answers. Thank you.
Sounds good. Hi, Chief.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Great. Yeah, we tested quite a few different vendors. I wanted to make sure we had the best possible product, not only for the officers, for the community. I got input from command officers from our IT department. So yes, the one we are proposing is a Cadillac product. The way it's set up is it's like a 5-year contract, and then you can choose to renew it. And during that time, they give you refreshes of hardware for both in the car and the body cams. I wish they would last longer, but being where outdoors, in the weather and getting jostled, any type of electronic, no matter how well it's built, you're 3 to 5 years is a refresh for the equipment built in. And as far as there's 2 ways to store the information, in-house on servers or cloud-based. This system, since it is, like you said, the Cadillac plan, it is cloud-based. It is part of the fees. And what's really nice about that is when we have any type of cases and we need to send the information out, there's actually links like for the prosecutor's office and different things like that, instead of trying to send a disc out the old way. So hopefully I hit some of your questions, but they're really good questions.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Very good. I get, maybe let's try this, Rebecca. I know you have more questions, but are there any other questions related to body cams that might be useful here that we want to ask? I thought I'd go there, but doesn't. Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a follow-up question on the cloud-based storage. So, Chief, I understand for the 5-year contract, it would be stored on the cloud. Sometimes cases run past those 5 years. Do we have the capability of extending that cloud-based storage if we were to choose at the end of the 5 years to go to a different service provider? Would we be able to download it and store it more locally, or is that more of a detailed IT question?
I think I could try to answer it. What I was told is once you get that data, it's yours during that time. So if we do choose to move on after the 5 years to a different company, you get to retain all that data. And then I'm assuming you could either move it locally or maybe to another cloud, but I would have to figure out those details.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Abraham. Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. One other quick question about the body cam. I'm going to assume that the 5-year contract will include like a warranty on the equipment, so that if it breaks or anything like that, it'll probably be covered. It won't come at an additional cost.
Correct. Anything that breaks, it's all under warranty, and they'll right away because we want to make sure all our officers are out there with functioning cameras.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional body cam questions at this point? Okay. Well, thanks, Chief, for your interlude now.
Thank you.
I'll go back to Councilmember Chamberlain-Kranga. I know you had more.
I also just want to tip my hat to the chief and to the Troy Police Department. As I was reviewing the budget and those performance indicators is where I ran into the observation that they have gone above and beyond in a lot of proactive visiting of different businesses in Troy that were, of course, as many of us are working from home, and that has meant a lot of vacant offices. And of course, being concerned and wanting to prevent any sort of crime, they proactively have gone around and, have patrolled different offices and office space. So again, I just want to, Chief, thank you so much to the entire police department for all of that work above and beyond. It shows the value of all that you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot.
Yeah, thank you. The other set of questions, so turning to a different topic around trails and pathways, which again, so proud to see us investing in something that was really a number one and a promising area that we heard in the survey that our residents want to see us invest in. And a question I had was around the Sylvan Glen Park. I see that in that bucket of funding, we're also going to spend some time on the Sylvan Glen Park. I think that's interesting for 2 reasons. We've invested in a trail around the park, and I find that people often come when there's a trail, they often will also spend time around the park area. So wanted to dive in to just ask more, what is that Sylvan Glen Park, those updates, what does that entail? And another thing to just mention, I think that it's valuable, we're looking into that or we're pursuing this, is as I revisited the Green Space Subcommittee recommendations, they had really recommended that we do all we can to really invest in that park and make it a real premier park in the city. So just wanted to hear more what the plans are for the Sylvan Glen Park.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig, City Manager Miller.
Yeah, Kurt Bovenseep is on, and I think he can answer that in great detail.
Hi, Kurt.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you. Yes, we've requested $250,000 over the next 3 years in the capital budget to specifically invest in Sylvan Glen Lake Park. Part of that plan was the trail that went through it. This was derived from the Parks and Recreation Master Plan that was recently adopted that specifically points to some concepts within the park, paved parking lot, pavilion, restrooms, pier, and play structures. So that investment over the next several years will continue to improve that park. And as you mentioned, is in line with the Green Space Subcommittee's recommendation that we take that park and invest our resources in that area.
That's great.
Thank you. Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig.
If I may follow up, another question. I'm not sure who this is directed to, and it's sort of a question, I guess, for the future. But just wondering, with our parks and as we invest in them, along with that often comes placemaking, which is more of maybe falls around recreation. And I just wanted to ask maybe City Manager Miller or others, kind of what is the history around how our city has approached placemaking? Because we know parks, people come to parks. They're not just parks, they're places, and people come to be able to engage, and that placemaking helps to just add to kind of that social cohesion building that is so important in the city. So just wondering, this isn't necessarily for this budget year, but what have we done, and what, say in the future, if ever we explore different placemaking options. And I'm thinking also of that investment behind the community center that we improved, turning the old parking lot into this with the green pavers, so we can have the market, our summer marketplace and whatnot. That's also has opportunities for placemaking. So wondering, like, where would that fall in terms of activities, of who would do that sort of work?
Mayor and Council, we at Troy haven't had any specific initiatives regarding the term placemaking. I am actually well aware of it. But I think, so you're talking about parks. A lot of people don't realize that we have purchased a number of parks, and Kurt, you can help fill it in when I'm done, about 8. We have 8 vacant parks, undeveloped parks, I should say, 8 or 9. So we have these opportunities of these other parks, which we don't have a funding source to build them out. So I think we do have a great opportunity to create, and there are a wide variety of properties. There are some that are smaller and larger. Kurt, you're more familiar with it. Could you kind of summarize that a little better?
Sure. And Rob gave the excited news about paying off our debt, and a large portion of that debt was to purchase those vacant parcels. And we have several throughout the city. And about 10 years ago, we took the opportunity and did concept plans for each one of those vacant parcels to do just that, create more of a place, a setting where people want to go to. Our parks are really divided into 2 different categories. We have our neighborhood parks and we have our community parks, where our neighborhood parks tend to be specifically for those neighborhoods that surround the park. And then our community parks become more of a destination. And that's where we've really concentrated our efforts into those placemaking type ideas, as those community parks, because they become a destination. It has been a while since we've done some great initiatives to create that placemaking. We haven't really fully come back from the recession in some of our programming in the parks, because we have had some staffing issues in the past. As an example, we would go to Firefighters Park and we would stock that lake with fish and then have a fishing expo in the park. And that created that sense of community and allowed people to go to that park that maybe would normally not go to that park. We are looking at different ways to create opportunity in the parks, and we work closely with the recreation department to do that. COVID obviously has made that a little tough. I know recreation in the past did some Hide a Rock program where you went out and did some geocache type searching in parks and getting people familiar with the different parks. So it is something that we're aware that we're deficient in and something that we need to concentrate on better.
Mayor,
Well, City Manager Miller.
just to follow up on that. So what I anticipate is that in next fall, when we do more of our strategic process, we will give you information, show you what those undeveloped parks are, and you can deliberate and give us direction. So then we can then develop whether it's expenditures or try to identify additional funding sources to, one, design those parks and then to build them out eventually.
Thank you. Assistant City Manager Bruder.
I just wanted to add is related to placemaking. That's often associated as a planning activity, and City Council is well aware that we're going through a master plan update process. And one of the results from the survey showed that folks want a downtown walkable area. That's a placemaking type activity. Coincidentally, that was also a hot topic of conversation during the joint meeting with Global Troy. Suffice it to say, the resident survey results, the complete package that was shared with City Council has been shared with the Planning Commission. And they're in the process of creating their own survey for the master plan process. So their survey will build upon the survey work that we've already done rather than repeat it. And so you may see some placemaking plans and activities come out of that process.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. Rebecca, you have more?
That's fine. And just wanted to say thank you so much for all that, especially Assistant City Manager Bruner. I have this hypothesis around the desire of our residents to see a downtown that I think actually some of what they want is around placemaking, and it may or may not require what is conceived as a downtown. And maybe some of the answer is around placemaking, which again, I think that the master plan update is a perfect chance to kind of dive into some of this. So again, just a hypothesis that need to talk more with residents and find out what is the things about a downtown that they want. But I think placemaking sometimes is, there can be something, it can answer to some of those needs that they have. So thank you.
Thank you. More questions from council? Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. As always, I enjoy the budget process and hammered staff with a ton of questions, and I thank you for all the detailed and thorough answers to everything. And residents can view that all off the website. It's all there as part of Q&A and the late submittals. A few questions I had. I have 4 or 5 questions, so I'll try to get through them quickly. Number one is, what is the timeline for the community center capital expenses and the library capital expenses? When do we think those projects are going to take off? When are they going to be completed? I know that community center in my questions, I know in the 23 and 24 fiscal years, there's a few $1 million being put into that as well. So I'm curious what the overall timeline is for that. Will there be any closures? What is that going to look like? And then same with the library capital expenses that are just in the next fiscal year. When is that going to begin? Probably soon after the start of the fiscal year, but I'm curious when residents will start being able to enjoy all that.
Mayor, I think Kurt or Dennis Trantham can help out with that.
Sounds good.
And thank you. I'll defer to Dennis for specific questions related to facilities. He's more familiar with that.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi, Mayor. Hi, Council. So as far as capital projects, we'll start with the 2 areas. Community center, it would be our goal to get the project for the roof bid out as soon as possible, get that work on the schedule for the roofers to try to get as best price as possible. That project, we would hope to begin early fall, late summer, depending on what the workload is of the contractors, and get that wrapped up by November 15th or so. HVAC, we'd probably try to muddle through the rest of this year and attack that at the beginning of spring, late winter, spring next year, kind of play the weather and kind of get that out on a more of a long range schedule for the contractor. Those are very large HVAC units on that building, and that's just something that we can't handle in-house. So those would be contracted out. As far as closures at the community center, we don't anticipate any closures. We may close an entrance because we have a crane set up or just for access for safety, but we don't anticipate any closures. And the same with the libraries. Once the library opens after, COVID, we would begin doing those capital projects. Some of those capital projects, like the office administration redesign, there would be some displacement of that staff. Same thing with the youth services. You'd have small closures, but it wouldn't be a wholesale closure of the building. And then as far as the HVAC goes, we are very fortunate in Troy to have a staff of facilities technicians that are capable of performing that work. So we are actually going to perform that work with in-house staff and save a substantial amount of money on that.
Thank you, Dennis. Councilmember Hamilton, did that satisfy your itch?
Yes, sure. My next question is, so we're moving some general fund expenditures to the major and local roads funds for Act 51. And so in effect, what that does is change the denominator of our unassigned fund balance. So that means what was an unassigned fund balance of 25% a year ago is now going to be slightly higher, 28, 29%. So number one, is that okay? Is the unassigned fund balance being used as kind of, a barometer of our financial health still valid? And do we have to kind of incorporate the major and local funds into that to get an accurate picture? Or because those are dedicated funds sources with Act 51, it's more natural to just put that separately and still focus on the general fund health? And then I just want your thoughts on that. Are we going to kind of change our long-term plan with the unassigned fund balance because it will kind of make it look more healthy and not I know in the budget, of course, we see it go down, but if you look, I looked through the last 3 budgets and we've never gone even close to where the predicted. We've been stuck above 30% for years and years and years, and our policy says we want unassigned fund balance to be 20 to 30%. So is that going to change our plan at all, or what are our thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Mark. Send to Rob. Is that okay? Go ahead, Rob.
Right. So I believe now we have the right denominator, as you said. So we eliminated the road Act 51 expenditures. So that's actually a good thing. And so because they have their own funding source, so they're outside of that purview. So I think right now going forward is the right way to look at it.
Okay, that's good. And that, that makes me feel very good about our financial health, which has been fantastic. Even when I joined council and in the last 4 years, that paid off, and unfunded liabilities paid off is looking very good. I was thinking of talking about the capital fund deficit, but I think I can save that for another day because I think that's a future discussion. We don't have anything to worry about in fiscal year 22 when it comes to capital fund. It's more of a future discussion. My next question was, when it comes to trails and pathways, and I like seeing that we're dedicating $750K a year to it. We saw from the survey results that that's definitely a priority. And I know in the coming weeks and months, we're going to have a more formal plan on how to address all the items that came up in the survey. But when it comes to trails and pathways, I remember reading the trails, I don't know if it was called the Trails Master Plan or whatever it was, from the late 2000s. And I loved that document, and I thought it was a fantastic document. And I'm not familiar with the whole process of how that was drafted, but I imagine there was some kind of ad hoc committee formed or something. And I've looked at other communities and noticed how several of them have pathways committees that are devoted to, getting volunteers from the community to help develop a pathways master plan, to help prioritize that, to interact with the neighborhoods to determine the future of that. And so I don't think this is relevant completely for this budget, but just in the back of my mind, I think in the coming weeks, I'm probably going to try to introduce some kind of plan. I don't know if it'll be something we'll formally vote on, or maybe we can try to gain consensus, some kind of plan to form a pathways committee or begin discussions or what the future are for the Trails and Pathways program, because it does seem to be critically important to our residents. And since we're working on phase 4 of phase 3 of this, we're really getting into I really would like to get into the long-term plan of it, to plan how we can link everything together, hook up to the Clinton River Trail. I know there's a lot of groups when I listen to SEMCOG or I listen to MML, they're talking about the Iron Belt Trail, which is trying to link all the trails and pathways throughout Michigan. So you could go from Belle Isle to the other side of Michigan or all the way to the UP in Michigan. So I feel like I'd really like to focus more on that, to really engage the community on it, have a really strong long-term plan that we now are ready to execute.
City Manager Miller?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, Councilman Hamilton. Public Works Director Kurt Bovensteep and I actually had a conversation about this, and we're starting to see that, maybe we've built up enough support by doing trails in parks that we're going to have to try to start getting trails done outside of parks where we've had a lot of friction in the past. And in fact, Kurt has brought it up to me. He thinks that it's time to look at looking at getting a consultant to help us, help us in that process. And I think Kurt was saying that he has enough money that he doesn't really need to specifically budget money. He has money within his budget to do that. Kurt, could you expand upon some of your thoughts that we talked about?
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor and Council. The City of Troy did develop several Trails and Pathways ad hoc committees. We still have one that isn't very active, but it's still something we communicate through email. So that is available to us. The 2009 Trails and Pathways Master Plan that you referenced, that was what we call a complete streets plan. So that took not only the recreational opportunity from Trails and Pathways, but also took the non-motorized transportation component. And it married those two together into a citywide system. Very, very extensive plan. Like I mentioned, it not only included the recreation component, but it also took into consideration any future road improvements that we look at and make sure we look at non-motorized transportation. We have used that plan several times, not only for the recreational component, but also for road improvements. As an example, the 10-foot wide asphalt pathway that runs along John R. that was recently accomplished, that came from the Complete Streets plan. So those are things that we consider. And as City Manager Miller mentioned, Council will be formally provided a report next council meeting on the results of the community engagement for the phase 3. But interestingly, the respondents out of there, most of the people that live directly next to the proposed trail really just wanted a loop through the park. They just wanted a walking trail that stayed inside the park. They weren't interested in connecting. The other half of the respondents that lived away from JC were really excited about that connection and wanted to know, how do all these trails link together? How do we get to the Clinton River Trail? So as Mark mentioned, I think it's time that we take some of those funds next year and hire a consultant to do extensive community engagement to develop these connections between phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, and get to other communities such as Rochester Hills with the Clinton River Trail, or through Auburn Hills. Clawson has a bike lane that's going through downtown that connects to Royal Oak. So there's a lot of opportunities that abut to us, along with Sterling Heights. So hire that consultant to get that master plan now that people are getting more familiar with the recreational opportunity. And I think that's where the demand is too. I don't think it's as much as non-motorized transportation. I think it's more for the recreational opportunity.
Thanks, Kurt. If the city had $1 for every time I asked you for an updated master plan on trails, we could have fully funded trails at this point, right? For the past 5-6 years, it's been a consistent question. So I'm glad that we're finally at that point. So that's exciting. Councilmember Hamilton, you want to go ahead and continue?
Yeah, I think that answers all my questions that I wanted to address now. I have a whole sheet full of them. I don't want to take up the whole time. But as far as a meeting Thursday, right now I feel pretty confident that we covered what needs to be covered at this meeting. And plus there's just so much. My daughter's trying to bust into my room again, but I think there's so much coming up with the rescue plan, with the survey engagement, that I'm pretty confident with where we are with this budget. For the first time in a while, it feels like a budget that's really pushing us forward instead of just, last year was a treading water budget. In the past, we had, turmoil with the city manager position. I really feel proud of this budget and where it's going, and I thank everyone for helping to make it happen.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamilton. Councilmember Hoderick, you were raising your hand at the same time as David, so go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I heard our CFO seem to be taking a little bit of a breath of relief in terms of how, analyzing the impact of the pandemic. But do we know, it seems to me we have built into this budget the ability to still navigate, because there's always a delay. It seems like whenever there's been a crisis in the broader community before it hits our city budget. And I feel as I look at this that we are in a place to, between the rescue plan and our budget, to navigate whatever unknown might be coming our way. And I think the short answer to that question, which I feel a responsibility to ask, is yes. Am I assuming the right thing?
Mayor, our assessor communicates with our CFO all the time, and I think since Nino's retiring, we should make him earn his retirement and give us his thoughts on this.
You read my mind, City Manager Miller.
You're killing me.
Hi, Nino. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council, my last budget session, thank God. I wish it was yours, but I know that's not going to work that way. I think what Rob and I talk about mostly is the tribunal appeals that we're going to get from the pandemic. I tried to get out in front of them. I lowered as many properties as I could. Unfortunately, most of those were in the DDA. But we budget for that. Rob's been real good about it. I tell him what I think's going to happen. We try to budget for that so that we have money set aside for the tribunal appeals. Most of you were not on council during the last recession. We had, at one point in time, I had 600 years worth of appeals out there. They were all 3 and 4 years old. We were giving away money right and left, but we budget for that process. And Rob's real good at this. I got to tell you, I've had 4 finance directors that I've worked for. I like John Lamrato, of course, because I went to high school with him, but Rob is the same guy. Rob's really good at this, and he'll get you through this. You'll be fine.
Very good. Ellen, did you have more?
It just, Nino and I go a ways back, and I can remember when we went through the trauma of the recession. I actually worked in City Hall and can remember thinking, could it really be that bad? And that was when I learned Prop A and Headley and the impact and how many years it would take us to bounce back. Through spending some time talking to a wide-eyed Nino Licari, who was saying, we are going to be in serious, we really have to look after the city. And so I find myself sitting here in a moment thinking, as we're talking about what are we going to do for parks and trails. And I mean, there was literally a white knuckling of a number of years with the city staff, many staff members, to get us through that time, protecting our AAA bond rating. And I find myself thinking, wow, I think we can start to breathe. And then of course the impact of the pandemic is in the back of my mind, how that might hit the city. And it's just, if you're comparing Rob to John L., That's a high level. I feel good about things. Feeling that's a high compliment to our current CFO, and we really are at. I feel like it took a long time, and you all predicted it would take a long time for us to reach this point, and I'm just really pleased with the budget. That still very fiscally responsible budget. Our residents should feel very confident in this. And I just wanted to make the comment that I appreciate that. And I kind of wanted to hear that final commentary from Nino as he was leaving, if he's feeling like we're in a good place. That's a very good sign. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. And thank you, Nino. If we don't see you again tonight, we'll see you Monday night next week, I think. So
I think I'm busy.
yeah. Nice try. Additional questions from council? Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to go back for a minute to the unassigned fund balance for the general fund. I know in one of the questions that had been asked earlier, and you can see the question and answer posted online, where the comment was made that, you know, part of the reason we dipped down below that 20 to 30% target for unassigned fund balance is our conservative estimates through the year, and that we do a good job of not spending all the budgeted funds, and that usually our unassigned fund balance ends up being higher than what we're projecting. You know, Rob, I don't know if this puts you too much on the spot, but what's the sensitivity between an underspend and our percentage of unassigned fund balance? So in other words, if we underspent by $1 million, would that bump up our unassigned fund balance like 2%, 5%, or is that not really a fair comparison?
Question.
Right. So I don't have it. I bet you David has the number better than I do. But if we have an unassigned fund balance of 20 million and we save $1 million, there you go. There's 5%, right? So that's the best answer I have for you. But I guess the point I wanted to, why I answered that question the way I did today was, I never want to give the impression that the ship is sinking or something like that each year. But the reality is we come under budget every year in a normal year. You know, this year's different, right? If we wouldn't have had the CARES Act dollars, this would have been a much different budget, right? We got over $4 million to help cover all those losses from our recreation primarily, right? So it's on a normal year, we will be under budget a couple $1 million. That's just how these budgets are set up. We've had great, and Jeanette can talk to this too, we've had great luck in this community of being under budget on our healthcare spend. Many communities get killed on their healthcare spend. We've been very fortunate that we've come under our illustrative rates every year. But we're in the hook for that because we're self-insured.
Appreciate that. And, you know, part of the reason that I was pointing that out or wanted to talk about it a little bit more fully is that I don't want people to look at the budget and take those numbers out of context and say, well, council, you're not even following your own policy. We anticipate falling within that range, and because historically we have, based off of our spending habits. And so I know we talked about that in the fall, but I wanted to bring that back up again. That we are planning carefully, and it's something that we constantly monitor, and it's exactly why we do a 3-year budget the way that we do.
Right. And to piggyback off of Ellen's question to Nino too, we were very careful, Mark, Bob, myself, we were very careful as we worked through this budget. We had many, many conversations We took your guys' cue from the November meetings. I believe the mayor mentioned something about using the term status quo or whatever the case may be. We were very careful. Outside of the library, we actually eliminated one position in the general fund budget this year. We didn't add anything. The previous budget, we had several, we added a few police officers, et cetera. We were very careful because, Nino's point is true. We all were around in some form or manner, during the Great Recession. We don't want to repeat that. Mark, Bob, and I have talked endlessly about never wanting to have to lay someone off. We take that very, very serious, So we try to be conservative, but we also try to keep it real because we know Councilmember Hamilton just mentioned that this budget's, he thinks we're moving forward. We think we are too. And so it's just that fine mix, right down that line of trying to keep it real, but keep it conservative too.
Yeah, that is a hallmark I notice, is that there's stability here where we might not have had it before. And I think I cut off City Manager Miller. Apologize, Mark.
No, I just wanted to add that what makes it even more confusing is we're expecting to get, 3.8 million, and we don't really know from the American Rescue Plan Act. So, this is very dynamic. I've never seen, this is a good statement, so many budget amendments because we've had, revenues not coming in, but also new revenues coming in. So once again, I expect us to meet more often than normal to make sure that we budget appropriately going forward.
Very good. Councilmember Abraham, did you have more?
Yeah, just a couple other items. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on was the state shared revenue, where in the past, this was often a disappointment. So it's really good to see that the numbers are stable, even if they're not quite as high as, frankly, I think what they should be. The fact that going back 10 years or so ago, we were at around the same amount we are now is disappointing, but knowing that it's been much lower is, I think we're in a better spot than we might have been. I don't anticipate the estimated or coming in over the estimated value, but again, that would have been another opportunity to further enhance our budget. Again, another unfortunate, it's not where it really should be, but it's stable and predictable. I guess out of curiosity, what would the value have been if we were to be made whole from a state shared revenue standpoint for the upcoming budget year?
Was your question going back to, let's say, around 2003, if it would have grown from there, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't done that calculation here, but I can tell you in my previous job in Warren, we always went with the baseline of 2003, and if it stayed up from inflation from there. In Warren, it was $56 million, if I recall, from 3 years ago on a budget slide. And so for Troy, just say it's probably close to half that or more, So that's a lot of revenue we've lost. And the reason, Mark and Bob and I have talked about this, the reason why we are trying to get away from that is that ship has sailed, right? We fought that battle for many years trying to get that revenue back from the state. So in a way, we're just looking forward now. And that's the way we're moving on, I guess.
Yep, I understand and agree with the approach. Last comment was about the Aquatic Center. We certainly had a lot of conversation about that in the fall. We're certainly budgeting for it to be open this year. Hopefully it will be. We'll be able to do that. I think going into the fall and those sessions that we have in November and December, we'll probably need to pick up where we left off to understand how can we manage that facility in a more sustainable fashion. But I would support what we're going forward with for this budget year. And then I
Mayor?
would say, oh, go ahead, Mark. I'm
I
sorry.
apologize. Yeah, definitely next fall we'll talk about the Aquatic Center, and we also are getting ready to release the new rates, which will be separate rates for residents and non-residents. And Brian Gould is on board if you want to hear about that coming up, because it's going to go out in Troy today.
Can I ask a quick, I do want to hear from Brian, but Mark, we've given consensus at a meeting or two ago to also discuss the possibility if there's reduced capacities for the Aquatic Center, whether this might be an appropriate time to look into whether just having residents, if we're going to have reduced capacities, only allowing residents, or at least for part of the season or to start out the season. Is that something you're prepared to speak to at all this evening, or is that something that needs to come back in another meeting?
For me, it'll have to come back, but I see Lori wants to say something.
Oh, all right. City Attorney Bloom?
So again, I think we can present something to you at a later date, but we really do need to be very cautious about limiting some of our facilities to residents only, because there are state law provisions, and then also some restrictions that we have because we do receive money from state and federal government.
We'll look forward to a weighty conversation on that in a future meeting then, because I have a lot of questions just from the 15 seconds you just gave me, Lori. So we'll come back to that. But sorry, go ahead, Brian. I think Mark wanted to have you talk a little bit about the rates.
Yeah, so right now we are raising the rates. Non-residents were $15 before, they're going to be 20, and residents are going to go from 10 to 15 for dailies. And we also did raise the season passes about 40%. As far as dailies go, we are putting in the book that as of right now, if the restrictions stay the same, right now, the only thing that could open at the outdoor pool would be the main pool, because the water parks are not permitted to open at this time. So the kiddie area and the slide area would not be able to open if restrictions are not lifted. So we are looking to modify the daily fees down to 10 for residents and 15 for non-residents. And we are planning on doing it as a reservation system, because as you mentioned, right now we will be limited by capacities. So it would be basically, if you're a member, you would have first shot at reserving your time slot, and there'll be 2-hour time slots 2 to 3 times a day. And then if there's spots available, we would open it up to dailies.
Thanks, Brian. Did I hear right from you just now that it's a 50% increase for a day rate for a resident, assuming normal capacity limits from $10 to $15?
Yes, we did raise it 50% for the residents, and also not 50% for non-residents, but we feel if we went over the $20, that would pretty much put us out of the market for non-residents.
Are we offering anything additional for the residents and for the non-residents other than a fee raise?
No.
We'll have to talk about that as well, I guess, and how we're going to work with that, because I'm sure that's the first question that I'll get asked when that Troy Today goes out, and they're going to wonder why. And I'm happy to explain what I think is the reason, but we might need to have a little more information on some of that thinking behind that, because I think as our job is the interface with the residents, they're not likely, well, Brian, they probably will go to YouTube because they know how to find you, but some of us might need a little more information to be able to talk about it, other than saying, well, we've had to put a lot of money into it. I don't think that's going to be a great answer for us to give to our residents about a little more something, but understanding.
Bob, Mark, and I would be happy to talk about it.
Sounds good. You can count on it. All right. Very good. All right. Thank you, Brian. Councilmember Abraham, did you have additional questions related to where you were?
No, I was trying to think of a clever question for Nino to answer, just to put him back on the spot again, but I couldn't. I think I'm all set, and I also don't see a need for the session on Thursday either.
All right, thank you. Who is next with questions? Or Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Thank you, Mayor. I have what I think might be a Nino question, and it sort of popped up this weekend as I witnessed a neighbor who had a house that went up for sale maybe a week ago, and they've had 9 offers. I think most of those over market value. And it sort of caught my hackles up a little bit thinking, are we in a residential property value bubble again? Which just makes me fearful. So if there's a quick answer to that question, that'd be great.
City Manager Miller, is it appropriate to bring Nino back for that one? See if he's still with us. Nino,
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I lost my camera. I'm very sorry about that. Yeah, we are definitely in a bubble. Houses, people are sitting in the driveway bidding against each other to buy these things.
It's crazy.
The residential market is just crazy right now, and obviously the commercial market is nosediving. So it's really a strange thing to see at this time of the year. But yeah, residential properties are just going through the roof right now. And a lot of that has to do with new construction, has to do with the price of the lumber now. Lumber's gone up 30, 40, 50% in some instances. So it costs a lot more to build a house. So people end up back in the used market to try and save some money.
Should we be concerned that we're going to see a repeat of the 08-09 debacle, or is this something that's isolated that'll maybe once COVID lifts, maybe this crisis of crazy sellers market will go away?
No, the 2005 crash was driven by like the auto companies and things of that nature. They're all doing fine right now. The auto companies are making money. The industrial companies are making money. That's what caused the residential crash back then. I don't see that happening for this period of time because of the pandemic. It'll level off. There's no question about that. But I'm not worried about any kind of recession in the housing market at all right now.
Thank you. That makes me feel really great.
Thank you.
So my other, Mayor, may I go ahead with
Please.
my other questions? Okay. We had a constituent reached out, I think it was to me and to Councilmember Hamilton recently, asking about where Troy is at on sustainability and trying to make us a more sustainable, more green community. And I was wondering if that's reflected in this budget, or is that something more that we should be looking at towards our fall strategic planning session?
Go ahead, City Manager Miller.
We have had some sustainability things such as recycling, but compared to some other communities that I'm aware of, like requiring green roofs, we don't really do a lot about that. You know, I don't think I can fully answer this question without thinking about it, because I think we would forget something. But also, I think council is going to have to give us feedback where they want to go with sustainability, because there are a lot of different things which you can do, which Troy would never do in the past. You know, like zero carbon footprint as an example. That has never been discussed at the city of Troy, but you can go to, I don't want to pick on Ann Arbor, but Marquette, Michigan talks about it as an example. But we have it in the past. So that's going to have to come from you, the council, to management, where you think we should go.
Well, what was pointed out to me is that just in the past year, I believe, Ferndale has actually hired a sustainability manager. So, and obviously, I think we're not in a position to, do any kind of major restructuring of the budget at this point. But I want us to keep in the back of our minds this idea, and maybe something to put on the agenda for our strategic planning in the fall, and see what we can do to make ourselves a more sustainable community. I agree with Assistant City Manager Bruner that where the exciting part of the budget is the special funds, and in particular the library. I'm so excited to see all the projects and plans. And first of all, I want to ask if we have a time frame for when the residents might see some of these improvements or new things, like like the study rooms in the adult section is really exciting for us nerds who want to find a place to hide away from the rest of the public.
Mayor?
Yes, Mark.
I'm going to do something, and I've been wanting Emily to get a little bit of FaceTime in front of council, and I know that she may not be able to answer all of the questions, and Dennis will probably have to help her, but I'd like to give Emily the opportunity to talk with council. Emily, you're on mute still, though.
Okay. Hi. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I'm very excited about all the great things coming our way. So as Dennis said, some things hopefully we can at least, start the process on prior to the new fiscal year. But other things like the study rooms, I think will probably happen as soon as we're able to, once we do move into that new budget year. What we're looking at in the study rooms is adding trendway walls. So if you've ever seen those, I was just dealing with it at Royal Oak Library before I left there. And they're great because they're these kind of artificial walls that they look completely glass. They are cheap, cost effective, but they're sturdy and they're very easy to put into place. So right now we're scouting out areas in the adult section. There's some really prime locations in that department to put those walls up. So that'll be kind of, the quick fix for the study rooms while we also get that plan in place, the study done for the adult section. That'll hopefully, get all of the boxes checked that we really need in the adult area. Just talking to the staff and stuff I've noticed on my own, I think there's a lot of really good places we could go with that area as far as, teen spaces, the study rooms, the admin offices in that area, the maker space. So there's definitely a lot of potential, and I'm excited to see what comes back from that adult services study, which again, hopefully the idea with all of this is just to get it done as soon as we're able to.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask the question that our public keeps asking us: when is the building going to reopen? Do we have a plan for that?
Yes, absolutely. So when I started, the numbers were looking really good for COVID. We were teetering. We were at like a 3.3% positivity rate. And actually, once they get below 3%, then it's considered very little threat for community spread. So I was talking to staff. I said, let's get ready to go. We'll move to our grab and go phase. And then the numbers just skyrocketed. It really set us back. As you probably know, we even had to close this week because we had a positive case on staff. So, it's been kind of the name of the game for the last year. It's just like, every time you think you're making some progress, there is a major setback. But, what I'm hoping is that now that the staff's had the opportunity to be vaccinated and most of the public has had that chance to, that we'll start to see the numbers improve. I did release a new updated plan because I think sometimes people get really frustrated when they can't see any metrics tied to a reopening plan. So I used the MI start map to tie our next phases to that. So that right now, the idea was when we move to a level C, a risk level C for our county, then we would move to our grab and go phase. And grab and go means like a limited time and capacity. So, we were getting prepared to move that phase. And then with the really high cases that happened, then it actually bumped our county down to a risk level of E. And we've been just stuck there for a month now. I watch those numbers every day just to see when things are going to be improving. But, that's the idea behind that reopening plan, which is available on our website, is if residents want to watch along with it and kind of see where we're at and where the rationale is for why we haven't moved forward with reopening quite yet. But that's the ultimate goal. I'm so looking forward to being able to get the public back in there and get to know the public and get all the great things started that we have in the works.
Thank you. And I'm also excited to hear that the curbside is planned to continue. I love that. I've actually gotten paper books for the first time in probably years because I can just go and just grab them and, from my car, which is really nice and convenient. And I was really bummed when we had this shutdown this past week because I had one queued up that, okay, it'll just have to wait. But thank you. I agree with your assessment that now is not a good time to reopen because of the COVID numbers. But I'm also happy to hear that there's a plan and a strategy in the works so that when the numbers go down, we can start looking at that. So thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Next question was, the presentation at the beginning, will that be posted on the website?
Yes.
I didn't see it. So, and then regarding the state shared revenues, I like the fact that we're kind of reluctantly giving up on hoping that they'll ever really go up again. But I'm a little concerned that I know we have there's a second estimating conference coming up in May, I believe. Are we at all concerned that they will go down after that conference?
City manager, or go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, always possible, Councilmember Erickson Galt. Each time we go to this, every 6 months or so, every 4 months, you never know what they're going to come up with.
Okay, and we have a contingency in case we take a hit on state shared revenues.
Right, and that's basically what our fund balance allows us, that flexibility, and that's why we do have that fund balance. Yes.
And then my final, it's more of a comment than a question. I really appreciate the infographic that you created. And one thing that came up in discussing the budget this past weekend with my husband, who is usually pretty up on these sort of things, he was surprised to learn that the majority of what the city of Troy collects in its tax bills doesn't go to the city of Troy. And I'm wondering what we as council, as city staff can do more to get the word out to our public about, all they see is the number that comes in the mail twice a year and the check that they have to write. And it's getting written to the city of Troy, and they have no idea that 2/3 of that goes elsewhere. And so I'm wondering what we can do to, in terms of, kind of thinking along the lines of the community outreach that we've talked about periodically over the last year or so. What can we do to educate the public about where those taxes are going? And I don't think we have to work too hard at it, because it looked like from our last survey that overall the city residents are pretty satisfied with, that they're getting good value for their tax dollars. But we do periodically get these questions. We write these big, huge tax checks, and and now you're coming back and asking for more. So I'd like to be able to work on that sort of public education element of it.
It's a good thought, Ann. Nino, I see that you came back on. Did you have some comments?
I didn't want to step on Rob's toes here, but we have that dollar bill on their tax bill. Everybody gets one. It says that on there. The budget goes out. Everybody can view the budget. It says that right on there. People just don't pay attention to it. My office in particular, we take hundreds and hundreds of calls a year about what are you doing with all that money? Excuse me. And we have to explain to them, no, we don't get it all. So, there's only so much outreach you can do. People just don't pay attention, because the check comes to the city, they don't know where the money is going. It would be different if every taxing entity had to collect their own taxes, but we do that for them. So we take a lot of that heat, but the city goes out of their way to let people know that, we're only getting 26 or 27% of that total tax bill.
Thank you for reminding me about that. I'm one of those residents who just takes the bill, pays it, and doesn't pay attention to the inserts that come in with it. So I think you're right in that respect. And I tell you honestly, before I was on council, before I was really thinking about this, I'm not sure I knew that 2/3 of the money went somewhere else. So this is I guess a common misperception.
Yeah, and every single millage that's levied is on that bill. It says right on there, but everybody just looks at the total because that's all they're worried about. That's what they got to write the check for. But every single millage is listed there and how much you're paying to each entity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bruner, did you have something more to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that although it is frustrating, and Nino expressed that frustration very well, it's something we just have to keep trying to communicate it all the time. And you'll notice that in the infographic, Stephanie's updated the way that information is presented. I think this most recent version was first used in our Citizens Academy. You've seen a lot of new and different charts and graphs that I helped produce in the course of the last year, which actually, showing the city portion of the tax bill and the school portion of the tax bill. And so I think we just have to keep talking about that. Anytime we're talking about the budget, just keep trying to talk about it and never stop talking about it, no matter how many people still haven't caught on, and just find, it's going to be an ongoing community engagement challenge forever.
Thank you.
It would also be helpful when the budget is finalized to blow up copies of those and display them at the community center and the library and city hall. Assuming people can get back in those facilities, but they will be at some point. I publish it in the Troy Today, all of those. I mean, those are the things that, and every time a tax bill goes out, maybe the city should social media do a post with the same thing, just as a reminder. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. I mean, even if it gets a couple people at a time, it spreads. Bob.
Yeah, I wanted to add, since you mentioned Troy Today, we talked about the survey results last week, and Troy Today and Troy Times were two communication pieces that reach a lot of community members. And that's because they show up at your house every quarter, every week, whether you ask for them or not. And so I've already talked to Cindy Stewart, our community affairs director, about adding new features to Troy Today to do a better job on communicating some of our financial issues. That the survey showed that, or what I believe is a perception gap, that we have a good story to tell about the city's finances and the city's budget. And we're telling it tonight, but that Troy Today reaches a lot more households than this meeting is going to reach. So I think you'll see some changes in our communications and our community engagement to try to get those messages out there in new and different ways that will reach more people.
The other thing to remember also is a lot of us have mortgages, so we don't really look at our tax bills and write a check to the city of Troy. It comes out of our mortgage payment each month, right? So we're not going through and looking as much. But that's just so that affects a lot of people, I think, too. Only
if you have the escrow.
Well, right. But a lot of people do, right? A lot of people do. So. Yeah,
a lot of people do, but some of us have a mortgage and write that check. So, thank you for that. Those were all of my questions. So, thank you so much.
All right. Go ahead, Ann.
Oh, I just want to final comment. Just thank everyone for all the hard work they put in. I'm getting this huge binder. Kurt dropped it off at my front door and said happy reading, which I thought was hilarious. But that is an amazing amount of work that goes into that, putting that budget together. And I'm just very appreciative of all the hard work of everybody to make it not just all the information, but make it understandable for non-numbers people like me. So thank you so much.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start with the same things that Councilmember Ann Erickson-Galt said. I wanted to first thank all of the city staff for putting together this very comprehensive budget. And I agree. One thing that I really appreciated about it was that it is fairly easy to read for somebody that's not, heavily into finance and numbers. And so I really, really appreciate that. And I was also very pleased that we had the results of the community survey, and we really took that information into account when we developed the budget. And it's really good to see that, a lot of the money is going towards the things that our residents really value, which includes, public safety, which includes the trails and pathways. And I also think it's important to really point out that the majority of the tax dollars do go towards the things that a lot of the residents value, like the schools, public safety, parks, and kind of emphasizing that, because I know that when we did the community survey, some of our lowest scores were, feeling like we don't know where the money's going. Well, the majority of our money is going towards things that residents value. So I think it's really kind of important to really point that out for our residents. I was also, excited to see, the projects that are projected for the library. I think that that's wonderful. And then I just wanted to talk just a second about the roads. And I know that Bill Hodery is on. And I know that, we're kind of ramping up more money towards our local roads, it looks like this year and moving forward. And I know the thought was that we wanted for the I-75 modernizing project to kind of be slowing down, but before we kind of ramped up some of the local roads. But it's still kind of going on, the modernizing I-75 project. Are we concerned that that there will be still more wear and tear on some of the local roads if we start at this juncture?
Mark, I see you want Bill to answer that one. Yeah. Hi, Bill.
Good evening. Yeah, I mean, the work that they're finishing now is they're kind of wrapping things up. The last I've been told is they're looking in June to kind of finalize the highway project, and then the landscaping project will start in the fall. So it's kind of the end of the project in Troy, at least. So, and you mentioned local roads, but I assume you mean the major roads.
Yeah, the major
city and county. So what you'll see, and what is not totally apparent in the budget, is the volume of work, or the pure dollar value of work that is coming, because we've done a very good job of partnering with the county on the slab replacement, or the concrete pavement replacement job that's coming. It's a little over $7 million. Our share is a little over 700,000. Adams Road is almost a $3 million project. Our share is 300,000. 14 Mile is a $2.2 million project. Our share is about 135,000. So there's a mix of road commission funds. There's a mix of federal dollars. There's all kinds of outside agency funds that we have coming in to fix the roads in Troy. And a lion's share of what we're looking at doing is the county roads, because they did take the brunt. County roads, plain and simple, carry the highest volumes. So when I-75 is under construction and traffic needs to move, it's going to move on the county roads. And we see it in our PACER ratings. We see it in the condition of the roads. We hear it from our residents. So that's what we're targeting. The city majors are more next spring. So they're still in the proposed 22 budget year, but you'll see the overlays on Square Lake from Adams to Crooks, and Coolidge from Square Lake to South Boulevard. You'll see those projects next spring. So we've kind of got the wave of county roads coming, and then we've got the city majors coming, and then in the 3-year budget you'll see projects on Stevenson to do all 2 miles of Stevenson from I-14 to I-75, and then a joint project that I've already started discussions with the road commission on. Okay, what do we do with? We're fixing all these county roads. What do we do? Maple Road. That's going to stick out like a sore thumb. So preliminary discussions there. The county is receptive to a 50-50 project on Maple Road, and then using tri-party funds. So the beauty of tri-party is that it reduces our share to a third. So it's a $600,000 program. Our share is $200,000. The other two comes from Oakland County, and then $200,000 from Road Commission. So that's even better than most other funds for a local match type program. So short story, what you'll see coming up here in the spring and this summer into the fall is some pretty heavy road work on county roads for a couple of different county projects that we're partnering with them on. And then next spring, you'll start to see some more emphasis on the city majors, Square Lake specifically, and then Coolidge. And then you'll see us backtracking in next year to Stevenson, and then hopefully Maple probably next year, and we'll probably be split in 2 years. And then the thing with roads is you fix them, you're going to have to fix them again in another 8 to 10 years. So the projects that we may have done back in 14, 15, you'll start seeing coming up in the 6-year budget, and that's why the out years, the last 3 years are lower. It's because we're waiting to see how the deterioration comes about before we start identifying those projects and seeing how the capital fund goes through. I mean, we may have other needs that are a higher priority than overlaying a section of Square Lake that we did years ago. So that those 3 years, although they're about half of what the kind of the 3-year budget shows, there's going to be some road projects coming out in those years as well. We just haven't identified those yet.
Okay, thank you. And I know that the asphalt, it doesn't last as long as concrete roads, correct?
Depends who you ask. If you ask the asphalt guys, they say it's more economically feasible than concrete. If you ask the concrete guys, they'll say the opposite. And each side will say they're more green than the other. There was talk about sustainability, and that's a big topic in pavement design itself. But yeah, in general, an asphalt pavement, we assume it's going to last 12 to 15 years if you put in a new pavement. Concrete, we look more to the 18 to 20. A lot of the theoretical, they'll say 25 to 30, but we just don't see that on Troy roads. Our volumes are too high. Our truck traffic is too high. I think a lot of the pavements in outer areas of the state, yeah, you're going to see a lot longer life. And some of our old pavements that were put in the 50s and 60s, they've weathered wonderfully. And a lot of it, lots of theories on that as well that we don't need to go into. But yeah, I mean, in general, the basic concept is concrete has got a longer design life than asphalt, but there's also a little bit more of a premium with concrete. So that's a kind of a balancing act that you have to go through when you look at what material to use.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
I just had one other quick question that in looking at the let me see, where was it? In looking at the pension, which is overfunded by about 120%, and VFib and the retiree healthcare programs are underfunded still. Is it possible to reallocate money from the pension, since it is overfunded by I think $35 or so million? Is that possible or no?
Go ahead, Rob.
Those are separate plans, Ms. Brooks, but we are going to be at a time when we're going to have to research this more thoroughly. And I don't know if Lori has done any of that research at all, but at some point, if our pension plan continues to be overfunded, when we can start taking resources from that, that's something that we will have to research. And I'm not aware at this point of that.
City Attorney, did you have anything or no?
Just, it will be something that we will need to research. There are lots of hurdles that we'll probably have to figure out how to work around. So, but yeah, we have a diminishing DB population. So we are going to need to look into this if we continue to have the numbers funding the plan that we have now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that it, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes, that's it. I mean, there was a lot of other good questions that were asked previously. And I agree with everyone else. I think that having this study session in November was very helpful in terms of determining the budget and really having a lot of time to really look at the budget. I don't necessarily feel that we need another budget study session, but obviously I will leave that up to everybody else as well.
I think everybody's asked questions. We have gone through everybody. Most of my questions have been asked, and I'll start again where I started earlier with a huge thank you. I mean, you've heard everybody mention it is very nice to have this beautiful budget binder delivered to us that is relatively easy to read. And we know there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into making it and providing that information for us. So I do really appreciate everyone on city staff for their role in that and their continued role throughout the year, and recognizing, I think, a year ago we talked about we had our virtual meetings. We're just starting when we did this process, and we were very clear, we'll be able to make budget amendments throughout the year if necessary, because it was such a foreign process at the time to be meeting virtually. But those same rules apply, and certainly, we're not approving anything tonight, but when I look back at the amount of information we've been given and the opportunity we've had to ask questions and discuss, and the transparency and posting everything on the website, the question and answers that were delivered to us again are, they're on there for anyone in the public to see. There's a lot of information out there that is actually, in a strange way, this meeting format, I think, has streamlined some of this process over this past year and made it more available for our residents to see and digest as we go along. So thank you for all of that. Before I make just some general comments, I did have one quick question that came to me in the middle of it. Do we anticipate our Historic Society and Nature Society needing additional funds again this year? Have we heard anything about that? That is just something that kind of dawned on me. Certainly that would be addressed by budget amendments, but is there any word on that at this point?
Mayor, I haven't heard, but I see Bob is raising his hand.
Yeah, I haven't received any requests outside of the usual appropriations. I think both, based on what I've seen so far, both organizations have made adjustments, but as you just mentioned, we can always deal with amendments if necessary.
Okay, and my other question actually is related to the Aquatic Center that came up a little bit tonight. I looked just quickly again through the budget, and I see where the expected revenues are supposed to be. I'm a little concerned about those levels of increases. I don't think it's up to me to say so, or actually I think it is up to me to say so. I don't get to make that decision, obviously, is my point. I'm wondering, I know it's an enterprise fund, and we talked a lot about what an enterprise fund is, and the idea is that it's self-sufficient. It's still not completely self-sufficient, even based on these budgeted numbers. But I'm a little concerned, basically, about how that's going to be absorbed in the community. Certainly, we had a lot of public comment and community feedback saying, hey, we're willing to pay more. But sometimes hearing that, or saying that they're willing to pay more and then actually realizing how much that is can make a big difference. So I'm wondering if we have, I'm sure there must be some projections based on, how many residents we expect to come, non-residents we expect to come, what the dollars will do based on the various increases. I would hope that those kind of metrics were used to determine that price increase. And if that could be shared with us at some point in the near future. I didn't hear when that was getting printed in the Troy today, but it sounded like very soon. I don't want the takeaway from what I think is an otherwise fantastic budget year and the hard work to be, they did all that, but they just jacked up my Aquatic Center fee and they're not doing anything for it. I can't even get a reservation, and those are the kind of comments I'm anticipating and fearful of. And I know we need to have a much bigger and broader conversation on the Aquatic Center as a whole. So I'm concerned with this aspect of it. So if I could at least get consensus to direct you guys to give us a report with a little bit more information on that. I think that would at least give us the opportunity to have the discussion with residents as necessary, and also necessary. I don't know if anyone else felt that way, but Bob?
Yeah, I think next Monday during the regular meeting, we can have the budget as a discussion item the way we did last year. And we can bring Brian back and talk more about how rates are set. It's supply and demand. The metro parks have a water park, the county has a water park, the city has a water park. So we don't simply set rates with the goal of covering our costs, but we have to set rates to compete with the other water parks out there. So I think next Monday we can talk about that a little more.
It's a big jump coming out of COVID, I guess is my initial thought. And it had some sticker shock for me, and then I imagine my family of 5. It's a big price difference if I don't have a pass, right? So I'm happy to talk about that. And I guess since you mentioned Monday night, I think there's consensus to cancel Thursday evening study session and just move forward with conversation or follow-up. Okay, good. So you got that official consensus. And I think that gives our residents an extra few days also. It's a week from tonight. Any feedback that comes relating to what they may be seeing tonight or what they hear about to have the opportunity to weigh in at next Monday's meeting. So the other, I guess my comments, I'll close with this. I'm very...
Mayor?
Oh, yeah. Ellen, go ahead.
I thought somebody might ask about the fire trucks. I think we should give Chief Chuck for his first budget study session with council a chance to provide us with a little bit of insight as to why those two apparatus are in our budget, and officially welcome him to the club.
Good point. And he's also the only one with a virtual background tonight, so that's the benefit of Zoom. So, Chuck, Chief, welcome. What can you tell us about these two new apparatus? Apparatus.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor, Council, Mr. Miller, and Councilmember Hoderick for the call out. I appreciate that. I was doing fine just listening to the budget and being enthused by all of the good news that I'm hearing. I was hoping that I wouldn't be overlooked, but here's my opportunity. The two apparatus that we've requested in the budget, one of them is a ladder truck. The other one is a mobile air tender. The ladder truck is a rear mount. It's approximately 2001. It is at the end of its life expectancy. With the assistance of Chief Roberts, we had set up a plan for the apparatus that goes out approximately 40 years to make sure the city understands the needs for apparatus and purchase and when we have to budget for them so that we don't become a drain on the budget. This vehicle is coming to the end of its life, and if we purchase it, it would allow us to have a similar make and model to two other ladder trucks that we have in town, rear mounts, ladder 5 and ladder 6. And what this does for us, it simplifies the training for the volunteers. It increases the safety of the use of the vehicle because people that come to use it are more familiar with it because it runs or operates just like the other two in town. The one we currently have doesn't do that. And then if we purchase a vehicle that's similar to the other two ladder trucks, we can place equipment in the same places. So at an emergency, you're not digging to look for where pieces of equipment should be. So those are some of the basic reasons why we, when we look into the vehicle, that's what we look to purchase. The mobile air tender is a unique type of vehicle. We take it with us to all of our life safety events, anywhere where we are required to wear air packs. And those instances, we have roughly about 100 structure fires a year, but we have about 300 calls where the firefighters have to don air packs where they would breathe fresh air. Those packs last between 20 and 30 minutes, depending on how hard the individual is working. Currently now, that vehicle is 20 years old. It was basically being band-aided, and it was built by the department approximately 20 years ago. It finally broke at a fire at the Easy Storage Fire on Coolidge in December. So now when there's an incident, we would have to shuttle bottles back and forth to the fire stations. So as you can see, that probably creates a higher risk to the firefighters, to the motoring public, because we're putting vehicles on the road to fill air bottles. And it's really not a safe event if you're transporting air bottles with 4,500 pounds of pressure in them in the back of a vehicle and one of them gets loose. It may cause a little bit of a problem for us. So it's much safer to have a vehicle at the incident. It's quicker for us, and it reduces the downtime that would be required for our crews, and they're able to get back in, control the fire, and put it out quicker and reduce loss to property values. So that's a very short synopsis on the two vehicles that we're requesting in the budget. Again, thank you for the opportunity. This has been enlightening for me as much as it has been for you.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it. And thank you, Councilmember Hoderick, for doing a good call out. We appreciate that very much. So, all right. Well, I think that tonight's presentation has been very straightforward. There's been a lot of good information given to us, given to the public. And I'm fascinated by the fact that we're talking both about this being a stable and status quo budget and a budget that's moving us forward. I think that probably says we're doing something right. And I'm actually really fascinated by that. But that that is, I think, where we should be at this point in a pandemic, at this point in, where we've been, what we've known coming from, past recessions and such. And so I'm, again, thankful for the reasonable and common sense aspect to working through this, and also excited to see what our new funding for the library can bring for us, and how we can find creative ways to continue to improve the quality of life services for our residents. You see we had a lot of talk, and there's a lot of emphasis in our budget about public safety and roads and trails and pathways, which are the things that are the big ticket items on our survey from our community. So I'm really excited to be able to see that play out. And again, just very thankful for city staff for working every day throughout the year to work on this, knowing that when we do approve this budget and sometime in May, they'll get to start working on the next one right then and there. So, I mean, I know it's a constant work in progress, and I know CFO Malsick, you've come to Troy at an interesting time, and you're doing a great job. I concur with everything everyone said, and Assistant City Manager Bruner, you consistently provide us with good graphs and information and presentation materials that I think are helping us communicate with the public in an effective way. And I guess, Mark, you get all the credit for all of that because you're the top dog. So we thank you for putting together a good team to help us through this process. Looks like we won't be having our Thursday evening continued study session. So we will have our meeting next week, our regular meeting, and with the expectation that there will be more budget conversation then. And I thank everybody for their good comments and questions, and it's good to have good conversation. So with that, I will adjourn us for the evening. Bye, everybody.